Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. So today I want to talk about the book Ordinary Men. It's the story of Reserve Police Battalion 101 and the final solution in Poland. And this is a book that I read in college years and years ago, and I recently listened to it as an audiobook again about a month or so ago. So I've been meaning to do this video for quite a while, and I've been sitting on this book meaning to record this video. But this is a story about how roughly 500 men of this Reserve Police Battalion 101 took part in killing people in Poland, killing Jews as part of Hitler's final solution. And hence the title of this book, Ordinary Men. This is the story of how ordinary, everyday people became cold-blooded killers, became the people who killed tens of thousands of people and really were the foot soldiers in Hitler's final solution. And these were working class, middle-aged men. They weren't elite Nazis. They weren't radicalized. A lot of people were born before the First World War, because it's really hard to radicalize someone after they're past their mid-20s. So these weren't people who were fanatic Nazis. They were just everyday, average, working people in really every sense of the word. And they were plumbers and carpenters and store clerks and teachers. They were just average working class. And most of them weren't even members of the Nazi Party. Even the ones who were members of the Nazi Party, they didn't become members until much later. So these were the opposite of radicalized Nazis. They were mainly people who were too old to be soldiers in the army, but so they were assigned as kind of just maintain order amongst the occupied territories. But these people did much more horrible things than just maintaining order. And most of their action was in Poland from the year 1942 to 1943, where they rounded up and massacred, I believe the number was like 38,000 Jews, and then tens and tens of thousands and more were rounded up and sent to death camps all throughout Hitler's Third Reich. I think what makes this story so haunting is that these people willingly took part in this. They were given the option to not take part in these killings before all these killings happened. Before they went to the town to round up people, they were given the option to sit out and not take part. And only about 10-20% of the people in this police battalion chose to not take part in these killings. And it goes into a couple of reasons of why these people chose to take part, but the main underlying theme is that they had a sense of loyalty to their comrades. They didn't want to sit out and let their comrades carry out all these killings. They didn't want to seem like they were cowards and that they were too afraid to take part in it. So really it's peer pressure. Peer pressure is what led these people to kill people. And it wasn't peer pressure in the sense that people were egging them on to do this, forcing them to do this. It was just the fear of not wanting to look like a coward, not wanting to let your friends do all the dirty work while you sit out and just watch this happen. So they weren't driven by ideology. They were just driven by the need to be there for their comrades. And these people, when this first started happening, were nauseated, throwing up, vomiting, completely disturbed by what they had to do. I mean, they would round up people, bring them to these pits, execute them in just hundreds or thousands at a time. And it talks about how they would shoot people and they would be covered in bone fragments and blood and brains from these people they were killing. So it wasn't an easy task for any of these people, yet they still did it just for loyalty to their comrades. And as this went on, they began to get used to it. It became routine. It was just something, an everyday thing that they did. And some even started to become enthusiastic about it. So it just shows how it can start with these people given the option to do it or not do it, and then they become just professional killers in the process. And it didn't start out with killings. A lot of these police units that took part in these killings were first just deporting people, just kind of doing routine things. And when this police battalion was given the assignment to, the first time they did any killing, when they went to this village and rounded up people, they were only told a couple hours before this happened that they were going to be taking part in this. So it wasn't like they trained for this. They just were given this assignment and had to carry it out. I think a lot of times when you hear about a lot of the Nazis trying to justify what they did during the final solution, you hear the excuse that they were just following orders. And that excuse doesn't really hold up for stories like this, because they were given the option to opt out of taking part. So they really weren't following orders. They chose to follow orders. They weren't forced to do this. And I think it just shows that this excuse about just following orders, it's an excuse to try to sound, like you're innocent, like it wasn't really your choice to do it. But I think this book also shows that just following orders can lead to horrible things. Just because someone's following orders doesn't mean that they're a good person, because these people were not good people. I'm not trying to justify what these people did. These people were terrible people for doing what they did. Yet, they weren't forced to do this. And I think it begs the question of, do just evil people commit evil acts? Can non-evil people also commit atrocities? And this book demonstrates that. It demonstrates that completely ordinary people, when told to do something, when given the option to do something, it can do terrible, the worst things someone could ever do, people did, when given the choice. I think it also demonstrates that genocide happens slowly. It's not like everyone in Germany woke up one day and just, started sending all these Jews to death camps. It was a slow process that involved ordinary people choosing not to do anything, choosing just to go along with things. And that's what happened here. Is people just chose to go along with what they were told to do and just did it because they didn't want to disrespect their comrades or seem like they were a coward. And I think it also shows that when you start dehumanizing someone, when you make killing people such a routine thing, when you start normalizing that, it just creates an environment where carrying out atrocities like this are just seen as normal and okay. But I think this book really is a good example about how dangerous group dynamics can be. When you're in a group of people, you're more likely to go along with what everyone is doing. What the majority of people are doing, you're more likely to follow than not. So it really, I think, makes you think about yourself and think, if you were in a situation, what would you have done? And I like to think that I would have been one of the 10 and 20% of people who said, no, I'm not going to take part in this. But you just don't know what happens when, until someone's in a situation like this, you don't know how they're going to act or what they would do. Because these were ordinary, everyday people. And it's just frightening that these people did that. And I think that the fact that these are ordinary people, it just shows this can happen anywhere. This is something that can happen in any country, any part of the world. Whenever you're rounding up a specific portion of the population, for whatever reason, the process of dehumanization starts to occur. And once the process of dehumanization starts, I think it's very hard to stop. So you have to stop it when it's very early on, or else you lead to situations like this where normal people are taking part in these terrible crimes. And I think what I'm trying to get at here is you see what's happening in the United States with them deporting illegal immigrants. And I think when you're rounding up people who are here illegally, they're not legally supposed to be here, I think the risk of dehumanization is very, very great because they're not legally here. So there's this legal justification to why they're doing it. So when you start rounding up people, a specific group of people, for whatever reason, the risk of dehumanization is there. And like I said before, once that starts, it's very hard to stop it. I think you see this in other parts of the world too. You see that this in the war in Gaza with what Israel's doing to Gaza. This process of dehumanization is happening there, and I think it's already leading to these kinds of terrible things happening. So I think that these kind of events that happened during World War II, they seem like they're so distant, they're so in the past, but these kind of things can still happen. And I think seeing it happen to ordinary people carrying this stuff out, it just really just makes it clear that this stuff can happen again. It could happen today, anywhere in the world. And there's one part of this book that I think sets a really good image of what was going on during the events of this book. And it talks about how this one police officer in the group, he only killed children. And when they had these executions, they would sometimes have mothers walk to these pits carrying their children or having their children by their hand there while they were executed. And this police officer would be with one of his fellow police officers, and the one he was with would shoot the mother, and he would always shoot the child. Because in his mind, shooting the child was justified because this kid was going to live the rest of his life without his mother. So he thought he was being merciful for killing the child instead of the mother, and it's just haunting to think about. Yeah, it just, I think that scene represents the most horrible kind of thing that can happen, and these people tried to justify it. They tried to find some way to justify killing innocent people, children with their parents. And yeah, it's just a really, really heavy book to read. It's just, reading about the things that happened is just haunting and terrifying. Just thinking that everyday, ordinary people carried out these crimes. Yeah, it just, I think it's really a warning from history that these kind of things can happen. And it's important to recognize when the very early stages of things are happening that can lead to this. When you start the process of dehumanization, you have to stop it very early on. And we have people in the world, especially the president of our country right now, using rhetoric like immigrants are poisoning the blood of our country, and just saying terrible things about people, whether they're here legally or illegally. When you target a specific group of people like this and dehumanize them, terrible, terrible things can happen. And I think this book is just, like I said, just a warning from history about what can happen. So, yeah, that's Ordinary Men. Be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.